This reminder, firstly, that it is suggested that every character, every archetype, and every symbol in every story is an aspect of our self, part of our psychic makeup. And secondly, of the question that's been posed. When the Buddha came to sit under the Bodhi tree, and he said, "I am not moving from here until it is done." What did the Buddha do when the dancing girls came along to tempt him? The fire came along to consume him, and the demons came. What did the Buddha do? There was that king who, like most kings, spent a great deal of his time defending his kingdom. He was very often at war, protecting his domain. And there was an occasion when he was coming back from such a battle with the dregs of his army, battle-weary, bloodied, when they had to pass through a vast forest on the edges of the king's realm, when suddenly the king stepped into an area of the forest where suddenly he felt deep peace. He felt himself able to hear, be aware of all the sounds that were around him. The sound of the birds, the rustles of the trees, even the little creatures above and under the ground. His senses became so alert, his awareness so boundless, and yet within him there was a sense of deep, deep tranquility. And he suddenly realized that he must have stepped into that area that he had heard of, that was the domain of the great sage Vasistha. And so, as he went deeper into this domain, feeling as he did even deeper and deeper peace and quietude within himself, he came to the clearing. In that clearing there were great trees, and under each tree sat a sage. It could be said, if we counted them, that there were 7 of them sitting in deep meditation, seemingly, although separate from, a part of the great tree in front of which they sat. But then the king saw, sitting outside a small and very simple hut, the great sage himself, seated in lotus position, in deep meditation. So the king approached the sage, and, of course, the sage, being aware, all aware, opened his eyes and recognized the king standing before him. The king bowed in obeisance before Vasistha, and Vasistha invited him to be seated. And they spent some time in deep, deep conversation, speaking about the ways of the world, the battles that the king had fought and won. And the time passed until the evening was coming down, and the king felt that it was time to take his leave. But the great sage said, "Wait, your army is tired from battle. Let me invite them to a feast." "Oh," said the king, "there are too many of them." "I do not want to trouble you." The great sage said, "This is no trouble. Bring them, call them forth." So the king called his army. The rattle of their armor could be heard as they approached, and there they were, a horde of soldiers, bloodied and weary from battle. The great sage invited them to be seated, and then, all in an audible whisper, he said, "Subhuti, Subhuti." And before the eyes of the king and all his soldiers, a shimmering field of light appeared, which formed itself into a cow. Great luminescent eyes, a velvet skin, majestic. And the sage said, "Subhuti, we have guests. Take care of them." And suddenly, each soldier had before him a feast of his heart's desire. Even the king received a great platter of delicacies beyond his imagining. The king was aghast. Who is this creature? And he found rising within himself a great desire for this being, this creature. And the sage said, "Ah, this is that which arrives when the sage has become completely emptied of all desires, all purpose." The king feasted on that which was before him, but as he was feasting, a great envy arose in him, a great desire for this creature. So when the repast was over, he said to the sage, "You have all that you need, and I am a king who is constantly having to take care of his kingdom, do battle with those who come to invade it. I need such a creature as this. How much do I need to pay for it?" And the great sage said, "You do not understand. This can only come when all has been relinquished, all the powers of nature gathered to do the will of that which remains when all movement and desire has ceased. It can be given to no one. It can be sold to no one. But the king was insistent. I want that cow. I will give you half my kingdom. And the sage shook his head and said it cannot be given. But by this time the king was so avid for what it was that he desired, he said, I will take her from you. And he called his army forth, all his soldiers, to capture the sacred cow. But as they approached her, all her atoms disbanded, becoming that shimmering field of light which disappeared before their eyes. The king was livid that the object of his desire had been taken from him, so he ordered his soldiers to kill the sage. But as soon as the soldiers approached Visatha, a great flame emerged from his mouth, and the soldiers were consumed in that flame and became a pile of ash at his feet. The king was beside himself with anger, and he turned, and ascending his horse, he rode off with hate and the desire for revenge in his heart. He went back to his kingdom, but he could not rest. He paced. He could not sleep. All he wanted was to take his revenge on the one who it seemed had taken away the thing that he most desired. Finally, he gave over his kingdom to his son, abdicating, and he went into the forest to study the ways of the yogi, the ways of magic, to gather the powers with which he could take his revenge on the great sage. After some years of practices, invocations, invoking, he had a panoply of psychic weapons, and he made his way back into the forest to there where the great sage was. When he arrived, the great sage was inside his hut, but immediately the king threw a fiery lance which ignited the hut so that it burned to the ground. The king was just about to congratulate himself on this achievement so easily, when out of the smoke that remained of the hut emerged the great sage, his hair singed, his garments burnt, but standing tall with his staff in his hand. Immediately the king let forth more of his weapons, but the sage merely held up his staff, which defrayed each and every weapon that the king sent forth to him. Finally, the king had to use his most formidable force, and that was to call up the great demons from the depths of the netherworlds and let them loose at the great sage. But he held up his staff, which seemed to expand, first as a field of great light, and then as a great, great abyss. And all of these demonic, devilish, ghoulish creatures were absorbed, swallowed in that which appeared when the staff expanded into its vastness. The king had no more weapons to bring forth, but at that moment, from within the great sage Vasitha came what can only be described as a great anger. And he was about to let forth this force onto the king in punishment for that which he had inflicted, when suddenly all those meditating beings under the trees in his dwelling opened their eyes, rose up and said, "Great being, do not allow this to invade your peace. Return to that place where it abides." And immediately Vasitha drew himself up, holding his staff in front of him. The staff and the great sage could not be separated in the sight of those who were present. And the king saw for himself that, as had been said, that which had been represented as the great cow of abundance was the sage himself, unable to be separated, as was the staff of power. So the king departed, having the great realization that he must attain what the sage had attained before this could be claimed. If, as it's said, all characters, archetypes, and symbols of every story are aspects of our own psyche, our own self. What is this story telling us? Is it an allegory of where we've been, or an allegory of what points the way to us as to what is to come, before we can stand in that place, that state, where the desirelessness, purposelessness allows all the laws of life to become that one power that serves our boundless, limitless state